Three Orcs channel. My name is David, and today I decided to go ahead and create a quick video with a new player that's going to be joining our campaign. I always like to talk to the player first to see if we're on the same page when it comes to the game, and see if we have a lot of things that are compatible and if they'll be a good fit. I feel like as the Dungeon Master, it's my responsibility to make sure that the players are a good fit with each other in the group, because not only does a successful group rely on a really good Dungeon Master, but also the players need to get along with each other as well if you want to make the game last for more than 3 or 4 sessions. So we met at a coffee shop. The video was recorded by one of the other members of my group, and I realized that the music is really loud in the coffee house, but you can actually hear me quite clearly, and you'll start to drown that out and be able to focus on what I'm saying. And I'll go ahead and comment here and there and show some graphics as I'm talking. The idea about getting to know somebody and to meet them for the first time, I like to find out what kind of player they are, what kind of experience they have playing D&D in the past, and what they're looking for now. And also I like to share that my perception of what D&D is all about and the kind of game that I run. I want to make sure that we're on the same page and that he's interested in playing the kind of game that I run. So what I do is I go over the pillars of D&D, and I compare new versus older style of D&D, not to point out which is better or worse, but to actually point out the differences in the kind of game that I run. What I have to say isn't just about Greyhawk or first edition, second edition, old school essentials, box set D&D. It can be applied to any version of the game. My main campaign, I run Castles and Crusades, which I say is the modern version of AD&D. But currently we're running old school essentials. The reason I'm running that is because I find it very accessible and quick to teach new players how to play D&D that's never played before, or to show them that style of old D&D to players that came from 5th edition that are looking for something else. Also, the modules provided from old school essentials are very accessible and easy to get into fast. It's really exciting, very interesting right away, and the players get into it and they have a lot of excitement and a lot of fun. I find that you get to know each other much quicker in a few sessions with an adventure like that versus a story type adventure that they have to meet in town, investigate something, question a bunch of NPCs, and role play much more. I find it much more engaging if they start off right at the beginning of the dungeon or in the dungeon, and they can just have fun. And then as the sessions go by, then we can determine whether or not if that player would be a good fit for other players in the game. So this is my discussion at the coffee shop. We try to pick a quiet corner next to the bathroom, and my friend's actually recording this. I'm a little embarrassed by this video of me, but I guess it's the opportunity for you to see me talking to somebody else versus just to the camera. I find I come alive when I'm actually talking to somebody else versus a sterile camera. So here we go.
Exploration and survival. There's exploration and survival. If you read any of the pillars of D&D, the old school core pillars of D&D was adventure, exploration, and survival. There's exploration and survival. If you read any of the old modules like this one, if you read this and you play it, you'll realize that the idea behind this is exploration and survival. That's what it was all about. There is role playing in here, and it plays well that way, but the core principles are always the same. If you read any of the old school modules, that's how they're written. Now, these modules came from conventions like at Gen Con back in the 70s, and those were tournaments. And the tournaments that was really good, that the people liked the most, TSR produced them as modules. And other people not from around there, like the West Coast, would buy them and run them. So the new D&D is, the pillars are different. It's more about storytelling. And so this is more of a tournament style kind of module where you try to go in there and survive and see how well you do and explore and interact with the world. Where in new D&D there is no rules for exploration at all, or dungeoneering. If you look in the player's handbook or the game guide, there's no rules for it in new D&D. And so they kind of hand wave that out, and they just let the modules kind of lead you by the nose. And so it's a different kind of gameplay. The differences between survivability. So there's no such thing as game balance in old D&D. If you read these old modules, you'll see that some of these encounters and monsters are way too powerful for the first level characters. Like in this module, there's an ogre. If you try to run this in 5e with an ogre, the CR balance would be off. It wouldn't be correct. It would not be for a first level adventure. In fact, the players will get upset. They'll think it's not fair. They'll think you're a bad DM. You're not running the game right because the encounter is not CR balanced. You can't run 5e without a CR balanced encounter, unless of course you're running a special game and your players like that. But most players will cry foul and get upset because you're cheating as a DM. Where in old modules, any of these old modules, you'll see that a viable solution to these overpowered encounters that the first level party could not defeat or overcome is running away is a viable solution. You can run away. So the thing is let's say you had a room full of 300 goblins. First level group, first level dungeon, but the room has 300 goblins. That'd be a CR God 200 whatever in 5th edition. But in old D&D, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as balance in the game. I can think of 100 different ways how to handle that group, those 30 goblins in that room. Not only just run away, but maybe you can set a trap, or maybe lure them out, or pick them off with guerrilla tactics. Maybe you got flaming oil, maybe all sorts of ways to do this. You can smoke them out. In 5e, they don't encourage any of that kind of thinking. It's just not how the game works.
Yep. So I changed it from 300 goblins to 30 goblins, but you see the point. And I do stress that to my players. I slow the game down a little bit by describing things a little bit more closely, and to actually have the NPCs, the monsters or the bandits or whatever, actually role play. Whenever a party encounters monsters or a band of bandits or whatever, they're usually doing something. Standing guard, playing cards, dice, sleeping, arguing, fighting, celebrating. They're usually doing something. So when the party approaches or encounters the enemy, it's up to the players how to engage that situation. They can sneak up, they can spy, they can eavesdrop, they can steal, they can just rush in and kill everything. They can bait them. There's so many things you can think of in the game depending on the situation. And as a DM, I try to provide that with every single encounter. Nothing is static. It's not a monster hotel. It's not a bunch of monsters just standing in all these different rooms waiting for the players to come kill them. It's more interactive and dynamic than that. And that's what I'm trying to explain here.
So in old school D&D, it's expected. So the differences between the two. In old school D&D, how good of a player you are is how good of a player you are, your experience. How good at D&D are you? It doesn't matter if you're a character. In newer D&D or Pathfinder, it's more about your character build, how powerful your character is, all your feats and skills and your roles and your build that you put together. That's how powerful you are. That's how good you are in D&D, is that character sheet. In old D&D, that doesn't matter. It's how good of a player you are. So, like I said, if you look into a room of 30 goblins, I can think of 100 ways to overcome that obstacle, get out of that situation. So that's the differences right there. And when I'm pointing out the differences, not in just concepts of how you run the game, but even as actually how the modules were written. When they wrote these, that's what they expected. When you read all these old modules, that's how they are. And the new modules aren't built like that anymore, unless you're running some special one-off 5e adventure that's like Hackmaster or the Black rules. What's it called?
Black Box.
Hardcore 5e rules. I forget what it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless you're doing something special like that. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the base rules here. So when you're running old school D&D, that's the differences, the expectations in the game. And I think dying a lot makes you a better player. So you get better and better and better. And I think Lee's gonna be a fantastic player eventually.
Every session I write down like what I learned, what mistakes I made.
Yeah, you analyze what you did wrong, right?
And what everybody else did wrong.
And you learn that way. So in old school D&D, it's all about exploring and surviving it. You got deadly traps, deadly encounters, deadly combat. It's the mortality rate's a lot higher. And of course, new one there isn't. Newer players have a problem with old D&D because they grew up on superhero movies and anime, and so they don't want any downtime. They want to be able to steamroll every encounter, go through 6 encounters in one night, no hesitation, and just finish up and all survive and be heroes and everybody gets a trophy. And they all level up. That's what modern gamers expect. That's the kind of game they like. Where old D&D, there's a lot of downtime. You don't heal as fast. You have to interact with the world and the situation a more realistic way. Like you have to take the time to search, or take the time to rest, or find a safe place to go, take time to go back to town. It's just a slower game, but it's also more deadly. So a new player would say, okay, it's not fair. I don't want to play that. That doesn't sound fun. If you fail your savings throw, against poison, you die. That's not fair at all. Or if undead hit you and you lose your levels. I don't want to play that. That's not fair. That's no fun. Why would I want to play that?
You should have run.
Or you're dead. Or you're dead at 0 hit points if you're playing the box set. But even if you're playing like modern AD&D, you're dead at -10. Well, getting there, you bleed to death. So every melee round you're in your negatives, you lose a hit point per round until somebody stops your bleeding. So anyway, it's a little bit more deadly with even AD&D. So the next thing I wanted to point out was the fact that leveling up is a lot slower because you get experience points for the monsters you kill, for your role playing, story awards, things like that. Even gold, treasure, and some DMs do magic items, but I don't do that. So there's different ways to get experience points when you're playing old school AD&D. So experience points. In new D&D and new or Pathfinder, everybody needs the same amount of experience points to go up level. They don't differentiate anymore. In old AD&D or the box sets, every class has different experience points. So rogues, this comes to balance issues. You know, we say there's no balance in the dungeon, but the game does have a certain kind of balance that's different from modern D&D. It's Gary Gygax's balance. The way he balances the game is every character class has different experience points to go up level. So rogues, they go up level the fastest because they only need 1,200 to get to first level, and then clerics only need 1,500. But wizards need 2,200, and fighters need 2,000. I think paladins need 2,500 to go up a level. So that kind of balances things out. And also there's this limitations of demi-humans where an elf can only get to a certain level, a dwarf can only get to a certain level, because they have all these inherent benefits like seeing in the dark, detect this and detect that. So it balances out that way in his Gary Gygax's eyes, and that's how we kind of run it with AD&D. But you don't have to, you can optionally waive that, but we're not talking about optional game here. So then we have spells. So wizards end up being the most powerful character in the entire game. The wizard class is the most powerful class of the entire game at high level, but they're the weakest at lower level. They take 2,500 experience points, 2,500 experience points to go up to second level, and they're weak, they have no armor, they got a dagger maybe, and they get 1 or 2 spells, and that sucks. But if you work at it hard enough, you become the most powerful character in the game. 5e is totally different. Totally balanced. Everybody's just as powerful. There is no, they balance everything so no players will gripe about imbalance. So how do you mitigate the problems with AD&D, how deadly it is? So it all starts off with character creation. The first thing about character creation is the group itself. And I know you know all this stuff, most people do, but there might be a few things that I'll point out they didn't really think about before. And I also want you to know that I said it so we both know we're on the same page. So when you get a fighter in the group, mitigating how dangerous a game is like this one where you're dead at 0 hit points. If you have a balanced party, it'll help you survive the encounter. So a fighter, his expectation of course is to hold that front line, to take damage, to avoid damage, to mitigate damage, but really his purpose is to hold that line, hold the enemy, occupy them just long enough for the rest of the party to give them the chance to do something. Because if you don't have a fighter in that group, those 30 goblins are going to steamroll through the party and kill everybody. It's going to be over. You know, you need somebody up there to stand up to it and to lead the way and open that door and come in. Okay, then that's obvious. Then you have the cleric. Now, of course, the obvious part of him is his ability to heal. In old D&D, you only get 1 hit point back per night of rest. In new D&D, you just take a short rest and you get everything back. And in old school essentials, you get 1 die 3 per night of rest, which is different. But in AD&D, it's 1 per night.
That's what it says in here too.
Okay, I didn't know that. Well, this is the box set. So a box set D&D is 1 die 3 per night. And AD&D is 1 hit point per night, plus your constitution bonus per week. Okay, so cleric. So obviously, so if you use optional combat effects, like somebody breaks their arm or something, like, heal spells can kill that instantly. Cure like wounds can. But that's how you get hit points back fast, is healing. So that's quite obvious. To mitigate the dangers of LD&D with a cleric is the fact that they can turn undead. Because there's undead that'll drain your levels, they'll drain your strength, they'll turn you into this or that. And new D&D doesn't do that. It's an inconvenience. It doesn't take you down a level, it doesn't do anything horrible things. And so to mitigate the dangers of old school D&D, of these old modules, is you need a cleric. That way you can attempt to at least turn that undead. And not just that, but their religious knowledge. You come across this old altar or this weird room, you might be able to give that cleric some information to give protect. You can give the player some warning. I think information is the major protection of a group. The more information a group has, the more they're capable of dealing with a dangerous situation. So if you can give them more information about a scene or a room or what's beyond that portal or that door, and the cleric knows that, the DM gives that information to them, that might help the party survive.
Oh yeah, I want to add a little comment to that, which I did bring up. So as a DM, I think it's, for me, to help mitigate the dangers of the game, is I like to do 3 tells. So it's a description. It's in your verbose description of an encounter, a room, a location. As you get closer, there's little tiny tells that you could tip off the players with, or a player in the party. Like maybe the rogue picked up something, or the wizard, or the cleric, or the ranger. They noticed something that's in their wheelhouse. Maybe the cleric can sense some necromantic energy coming from beyond the hallway of the portal. Or the wizard can detect the brimstone scent of magic and energy from beyond the door. Or maybe the thief can see the hack marks on the side of the door, like the chew marks from the animal that try to get through with the claw marks. Or maybe they heard something, they can hear it, some kind of telltale sound, or the temperature from beyond that hallway or portal, or in the forest even. You hear in nature, even outside, you hear the birds and the animal creatures, the critters in the forest. Maybe they go quiet, or maybe they're not behaving correctly. Something's in the area that spooked them. So what I always try to give 3 tells. I can't always do it, but I try, because I don't just want to gank the party, but that would be unfair, and that could easily happen in an old style game because it's so deadly. Sorry, you failed your save versus poison, you're dead. Okay, next. I mean, I'd rather give some little bit of warning on that chest or that doorknob or something, just some kind of vague warning, maybe up to 3 tells of the environment to kind of tip off the players to be more careful here, or something's up. And if they ignore it, then they ignore it. But at least I tried. I can't just rely on the die roll to determine their fate without some kind of warning, without them sort of agency to be able to do something to control their environment. So that's basically what that's all about.
So next class, that's really important, is the outdoors. When you're outdoors, I did this in 5e. I actually played a ranger, and I played in a group without a ranger in 5e. And this is the problem. Let's say you're traveling down this merchant highway, and in the distance you see plumes of smoke rising in the distance, and you come across this wreckage of a caravan. The wagons are all turned over, flames, bodies everywhere. So naturally the party's going to have some questions. They're going to want to know, who did this? What did this? How long ago did this happen? Which way did they go? How many were there? These are all really important questions. I don't know if you're going to rescue somebody or you want to avoid them or whatever the case is. This information you really need. And the one person in the party that's most capable of finding that information is the ranger. So that's why he's important in this situation. Also, if you're trying to track somebody down, you're trying to find the dungeon, or trying to find a safe place to camp, ranger. The reason being he's so important is because surprise. Because the game's so deadly, if the group is ever surprised by a group of monsters, it could be a party wipe. People could die. So to mitigate that problem is having a good ranger in your group. And also when you're traveling, if he's a little bit ahead and he's scouting for ambushes, he's the one mechanic that's going to help you avoid those ambushes. Of course, you could probably get a druid to help do all that too, but the ranger would be the best at it. Okay, also in the games I run, anybody can attempt to do anything, but the ranger is best at doing that stuff. So then we have indoors, in the town and in the dungeon. Same thing about the ranger, but the rogue. You really need to know what's down the other side of that door. You need to know what's down that corridor, around the corner. You need to know if that chest is trapped, if that portal is trapped. You need to be able to pick that lock. You need to find that trap and disable it. And because poison is much more deadly in this game, so if you fail your savings throw, you could die. Where in new D&D, no, you don't die. You're just a little bit of inconvenience. You take some damage, or maybe go to sleep or something. But in old D&D, you die, and that's one of those things where you make your roll. If you fail your savings throw, you're dead. That sucks. So the way to avoid that, to mitigate that issue, is to have a good rogue in your group. And if he dies, then the losses are acceptable, right? So, same thing in town. You know, you want to find out the rumors. You know, track somebody down, case or joints, or break into a room. You need a rogue for all that stuff. Okay, then the last thing I want to point out was the wizard. So the wizard, your ace in the hole. He's that one character in the group that can save the entire party out of a bad situation. He's got that sleep spell, that other spell that can affect the entire outcome of a battle. He only has one or two spells at first, but those spells can come in handy to save the whole party. So that's why he's important. Plus his arcane knowledge, those glyphs on the wall, or what's in the books. You know, his knowledge is very useful too when it comes to survivability in the game. So back to the beginning, how to keep old school gaming, to mitigate the dangers of it, is to have a balanced party. So that's my spiel on that.
Retainers.
Yeah. Okay, what else? The next thing I was going to go into, role playing. So you don't automatically search for anything. You know, like you search for a room or see if you notice something, or investigation checks or whatever. You don't do that. You just role play it. You describe what you're doing at all times. You go, how are you walking down that corridor? How are you listening to that door? How are you going to open that door? I'll tell you which way it swings. I'll tell you what the hinges look like. I'll tell you if there's a lock, tracks on the ground, or if there's light under the door. How are you searching for a trap? How are you searching the room? What are you looking for specifically? You got to describe it. Yeah, they're coming for us. Where in newer systems, you just roll a die. Okay, you roll a die, you made it, you found whatever's in the room, or you notice that about that guy or whatever. And it doesn't encourage role playing. Any role playing that these newer players do are just a band-aid to cover the mechanic, the required mechanic. That role is the only thing that really matters in that game. Their role playing is irrelevant. It's just like a cover. It's like frosting on a cake. It's cool to do it. I like them doing it, but does it really affect the game? No.
Yeah, I think when David asks you to make a roll for something, you've already failed.
When I run a game, if you role play so well and you know you do a really good job of what you're trying to do, a lot of times I only ask you to roll. You succeed if it's simple enough. The only time you roll is when there's a significant chance of failure. That's how I run the game. Because that's how Castles and Crusades does it, which is a whole other subject. But yeah, I should just make a YouTube video and just say, well, watch this.
So no skills like.
Oh, skills. Sorry. Well, we kind of touched upon that. You always describe what you're going to do. So there's no skill list. The problem with skills is if you have a list of, like, let's say you got 10 skills in your character sheet, and you come across a situation, and you look at your character sheet, and the player none of the skills matches what to help them in the situation. I can't do anything. Hey, can you do anything? What skills do you have? And they're asking around the group what skills they have. And so it limits creativity and role playing. They don't think outside the box. And that's what skills does.
Just try to do anything you want.
The reason they made skills is to codify the rules. Like if you want to swim, there's exact rules on how to swim and when you need to roll. But unfortunately, when they make a skill list, it limits the creativity, and players end up thinking, especially new ones, that's all they can do in the game. And if their skill doesn't match up to the situation they're in, I don't know, there's nothing I can do. Where, like Castles and Crusades in this game, and a lot of the games, AD&D First Edition, does not have a skill list. So you can attempt to do anything you want, and the ability checks are all based on your trivia scores. So if you have a higher strength, and you know it's going to be a strength, what you're trying to do probably requires strength, and you know you have high strength, you know you have a pretty good chance of success. You know that as a player. If you're going to try to do something that needs charisma, like trying to bluff a guard or intimidate somebody, and you have a low charisma or strength, depending on what we're talking about here, you know you probably don't have a good chance, and you probably don't want to attempt it. But you can still attempt it. Go ahead, make your roll. And And then, of course, as the DM, I can add modifiers to that depending on the situation.
Okay, let me clarify that a little bit further for some of those out there that don't quite know how these different systems work. So as I said before in this video, that box set, BX, BX, EX, BX, basic box set, D&D, 0 edition D&D, 1st edition, and Castles and Crusades, and other OSR type games do not have skill lists. And what you're going to do is when you want to roleplay an action in the game that requires maybe a skill like swimming or intimidation or searching or something, it's going to be just a free form role-playing term that you match with your ability score. So I know that they do that in the modern games where they already attached those different skills to an ability score, and that's what you make your roll against. So a new DM, if you can't think on your feet and match that ability score with the action they're taking, you can always cheat and just kind of reference like 3rd edition or 5th edition of what they use. Like which one is, which attribute score is matched to intimidation, or what's attached to like swimming or bluffing or anything like that. And the first thing a lot of the newer players will ask is, well, how do I ever get better at any of those skills? In old D&D box set and 1st edition, you don't. It's basically just based on your attribute scores. But it's really interesting to point out, though, in those games, the way to increase your attributes is through spells or magic items, which is quite different from modern versions of role-playing games. Because in modern, newer games, the mechanics are built in as you level up. You get to choose to increase your stats, to raise your strength or intelligence or wisdom or something. And that's just it's like a feat or a skill or part of your character sheet. That's how modern games do it. It turns it more into a video game when you do that. But in old AD&D, or D&D for that matter, the way to increase your base stats from 1st level is to find a magic item or get a spell cast on you. A couple good examples would be like Gauntlets of Ogre Power. That'll give you an 18 strength. Or a wish spell. You can wish for a stat increase. And there's a whole number of spells that can actually do that, even temporarily. And of course, there's a whole bunch of magic items like tomes. You read this tome and it'll increase your constitution or something, and other magic items like that. So that's the expectations in those old games. How to increase your stats is in that way. And one more thing I'd like to add is with Castles and Crusades, it's considered a modern version of AD&D that has a lot of modern sensibilities that newer players would expect in a modern game. And one of those things is how you do increase your skills. And the way that works in that game is you match up the attribute score with the action you're going to do, like a strength check or a wisdom check or whatever, and you add your level to your roll. So that means at 1st level, you get +1 to your roll, and you're kind of okay at whatever you're trying to do. Then at 5th level, you're going to add +5 to that roll. You're a lot better at that. Then at 10th level, Lord status, Lord class name, you're getting +10 to your roll. So you're really good at what you're trying to do. So that game has a mechanic for increasing your ability to do something in the game system. And I find that works out really well. So let's continue.
Now, sometimes you can improve the situation. Like, let's say you're trying to bluff a guard. Okay, I try to bluff a guard. I want him to get me. I want to let me past. Okay, go ahead and roleplay it. Tell me what you say. So you say what you're gonna say. I have permission to be here. The king told me to come here to take the prisoner away. You say that, for example. Okay, make your charisma check and see if you make it. Right? That's the way you expect the game to work. Well, you can actually increase your odds by. Think about this. Just be logical, be a good player, and just think outside the box. Just say, I'm a player, and I want to do that, and I want to say that, but I want to increase my odds. My charisma's not very high. What can I do to give me a better odds? I got an idea. Guards usually do not know how to read. I know that. Okay, how can I take that to my advantage? I'm the player thinking in my head. You know what? Okay, so you take a note out of your pocket and you present it to the guard. The king's writ to detain the prisoner. I'm taking him out of here. The guard will look at it. He can't read it, right? But he obviously thinks it's real if you roleplay it well enough. So maybe I'll give you a +4 on your roll. You're thinking, let's say you want to move a boulder. You want to do a strength check, right? And let's say you want to improve your odds, no matter what your strength is. Your strength determines what you have to roll. But let's say you want to improve your odds. Use a crowbar. Oh wow, that's a good idea. I'll give you a +2 on your roll because you're using leverage. Just think outside the box to increase your odds. You do not need a skill list to figure out how to do this stuff. Um, background skills. What did you do? Did you determine if you're good at something or not? I use background. So if you create a character and you write a background, let's say you grew up in your father's fishing boat on the river, fishing every day. Well, it seems logical to me that you probably know how to swim. You probably don't know how to read. You know how to tie ropes, you know how to fish, you know how to sail a boat, you know how to repair cloth. I don't know, whatever you can think of that related to what you're doing growing up in life until you became an adventurer. That's your set of knowledge skills from the past. So if you ever come across a situation where you think that your background as a fisherman will come into play, you can bring that up. My dad was a fisherman. I served on this boat for years. I know how to do that. I'm a great swimmer. Hey, you know you're right. It's in your background. Okay, no problem. I'll give you a +4 on your roll.
Hey, I'd like to add something more to that. So, based on your background, how good you could be at something, there's a couple things I really need to know as a DM. I think any DM running any campaign needs to know this stuff. The most important things is, do you know how to read? Do you know how to ride a horse? Do you know how to swim? And maybe a few more things like, can you build a fire? Or camp outside, I suppose. But you really need to know if somebody can read, write, swim, or even ride a horse. So let's continue.
That's how it works without skills. Role playing.
Makes sense.
Okay, I knew you know a lot of this, but saying it sets expectations.
Right. Anything about equipment?
Well, equipment can directly affect the outcome of anything you try, like the nodes or the crowbar, dark clothes, how you present yourself, how you interact with the world around you. So let's say this guard's human and in a big city. So what if you're half orc? What color are you dressed like a merchant? Are you dressed like a wizard? Do you look like a guard? That will directly affect how he responds to you. Same thing if you accost some monsters like goblins or some bandits. Depending on how you present yourself, what you say, your battle cry, how you look, the weapons you use can directly affect the morale.
Yeah, and I mentioned this in a few videos already, but as you can see in the top right-hand corner, I do have a list here. And in this list of things that directly affect the outcome of any encounter in the game, from role-playing encounters to combat encounters. One is the environmental. The environment you're in. Is there a bridge? Is there running water? Is there fire pits? Things like that. In a cave? Is it dark? Is there light sources? 2, how you present yourself. You can present yourself in any way in this game. There's no such thing as all fighters are the same. I can create 10 different fighters and they'll all be completely different characters. You could be a pirate fighter, a smuggler fighter, a caravan guard, a city guard. You could be a gladiator. There's all sorts of types of personalities you can take on, and that's all from step 3, which is role-playing, how you role-play your character, the words you use, the tone you use, and how you act and are perceived by others. 4 is the equipment that you're using. What kind of weapons do you use? What kind of weapon style do you have? What kind of armor you're wearing? Any kind of specialized equipment that you have. And then, of course, the creative use of those components. Also, which could affect an encounter is if your race and your class and your background skills, which is earlier when I mentioned that background skills is related to how you're raised before you became an adventurer. So that knowledge, those skills can come into play in any situation, no matter what your class or race is.
All that stuff directly affects the game. And that's a good DM, that's a good way to run the game. But an inexperienced DM couldn't pull that off. He'd be lost. He needs codified rules to run the game. And that's why they made newer editions D&D.
Okay, so that wraps up the video. I could talk about this for hours. All my videos are about an hour long. I never feel like I conveyed everything I could have. It seems like the material, the information is inexhaustible. It seems like I never run out of things to say or interesting things to prove a point or to convey to a player of different kind of players, different kind of dungeon masters, inexperienced new DMs or even experienced DMs. Information that I feel that can be used in their campaign. As you noticed, my videos are specific, narrow, focused topics. I talk about one thing. I usually talk about like one campaign world, one campaign, like one city, one class, one way of doing things. And I feel like I can contribute much more value to the public of D&D by making these videos for them rather than just a generic top 5 or top 10 list of things of great DMs or bad players or good players or whatever, or the most deadly monster or the best magic items. I think all that stuff is just irrelevant information that you really can't use too well in a campaign as a dungeon master. So I hope you find this information is valuable. If you want to support me, please go to my Patreon and support me there. Every contribution there will help encourage me to create more videos like this. If you have any comments, please list them below. And if you have any requests, let me know. I'd like to hear it because I'm always thinking of new things I can talk about. Thank you for your time. I hope all your sessions are eventful and fun as mine.